Hey guys, I'm Brent.
I'm Lila, and you can find us on the web at www.braintrustlive.com. And we have my mother here today, Carla Nordstrom, to discuss the state of the Senate races, which we have been saying for a long time, largely thanks to her input, is really where you should be focusing your energy if you're going to be thinking about national level races right now. That's where it's at.
I'm excited about this. Carla emailed us a whole spreadsheet earlier in the week about all of the Senate races, and I've been excited about this because I agree.
Yeah, well, and we wanted to make sure, A, that you knew about all of the Senate candidates that are either of specific interest to you because you are a person in a state that we are not in, or of specific interest to you because you are a person in a state without Senate races and you're looking for people to give your money to that are not Joe Biden.
Or maybe you're dialed in to politics or think you are as much as I am and still managed to not know who some of these people were.
That too. Yeah, well, there's like layers of Senate races that get, attention. One of them involves the DSCC picking a candidate, and that candidate is almost always someone you're not interested in. And so then you tune out that race, and then, because you don't want to give money to John Ossoff or whoever, and then you don't realize that there's some great candidates running in places as far-flung as Alaska.
Right. Alaska, Idaho.
Where my mother's favorite candidate, aside from Idaho's candidate, is located.
Right.
But so anyway, welcome to the podcast again. You're one of our most frequent visitors. And I think before we ask you to dive in, I had a brilliant epiphany at our family dance party this morning that I wanted to share with everyone.
Where all your best ideas come from, right? Isn't that what you told me?
Yeah, that's sometimes. I wonder, Mom, do you see me like texting during the dance party frequently?
Yes.
Yeah, I feel like sorry, she's been nodding along with us this whole time.
Right.
So we just, yeah, you gotta vocalize your agreement on the podcast.
Yes.
But yeah, because sometimes while I'm at the family dance party, because I'm not thinking about anything else, I have brilliant epiphanies. And today's brilliant epiphany was that so Brent and I had been having discussions this week because we both have our ballots about what to do about two races in particular that had no candidates that we were interested in.
Right.
And, we both really hate the idea of leaving races blank, but these races didn't have a place for us to do write-ins because the jungle primary system makes it so that, it becomes the top two go to the general and it becomes a runoff. And so you're not allowed to write someone in. And one includes my arch nemesis, Democratic Senator Adam Schiff, who everyone in America is enamored with, but everyone in America doesn't live in his district. And everyone in America, like me, has no idea where he stands on various issues that affect his district. So I think that we should be petitioning the state to add an abstain button to the ballot so that if something like 60% of the voters abstain, we should just start again. Because then you can actively abstain. That seems like a real
I like it.
Win for everyone. That's what the people are looking for. So in any case, I wanted to remember to mention that before we dove in, because it was my brilliant idea of this morning, and I might not have another one until next week. And so I wanted to make sure that we were prepared.
You made one misstatement in that statement there, in that I do not have my ballot anymore.
Oh, that's true. Brent voted.
I handed that in, I got it and it came, and I have been one of these people. I've said it on the podcast. I'm probably just either going to vote on the day. I'm going to go hand it in. But I was like, it got here and it was just like the beating heart under the floorboard. It was like, and also I'm like, it's 2020. Like we might fall into a sinkhole before November 3rd. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. Right.
I hadn't thought about the sinkhole situation.
And I have to say it was more liberating to fill out and drop in a ballot drop box than I would have actually even imagined. I've been trying to get Lila to do it all week because I'm like, do it, fill it out, you'll be done. It like gave me a lot of like leeway to not care about shit this week.
Well, I feel like the problem that I'm having is that I think I'm going to feel guilty no matter what I do. Yeah. And I also feel like once I've filled in the ballot, then I've sealed my fate as either complicit or not complicit in a thing I don't approve of. And I just I'm like, wait, I don't want to live in the moment where I've already been complicit. I love being not complicit yet. And so I've just been having a hard time, and I love voting. So this is a really disappointing, this is why I don't vote by mail. This is why I always go and vote in person, because voting in person is like, once you're there, you got to just do it. You can't dawdle,
Yeah.
Whereas this has just been sitting here torturing me all week because
Yeah. You
I've
gotta
been trying to
worry.
figure
You gotta deal with.
what do I do to register my complaint with Adam Schiff when you don't have an abstain vote that
Yeah,
you can
you
make?
just leave it blank.
You know, that's what I'm going to do. I got to
what I
leave
did.
it blank.
Yeah.
So in any case, I got to get on board and just do it. I'm wearing a Bernie shirt today because I thought maybe I'll do it today. And I thought then at least I would feel like I was doing it in protest. I don't know if that means anything, but it's been I've been really popular in and around West Hollywood today because people like are calling out to me. People are starting conversations. My favorite thing is to talk to strangers randomly on the street. And so I love when I have a piece of clothing that allows me to have random strangers come up to me and tell me how great I am. And so this shirt has been really doing it. People in California were excited for Bernie Sanders, as it turns out, because all of them want to stop and talk to me about how he was robbed, about like everyone's livid on the streets. So I recommend wearing your Bernie merch out in West Hollywood if you need to. In any case, let's talk about the Senate. I think what we should do is maybe go through and actually just go through and tell you who's running in each state, but we'll highlight the ones that are most interesting.
Should we tell you what the math is first? I have that down a little bit later, but should we, the one thing that, because then that sort of like lets you frame some of these as sort of like what you need to win or don't need to win or whatever. But right now it's 53 to 47. So if you win the presidency, then you technically have the Senate if it's tied 50-50. So Democrats need to flip at least 3 seats, but the first seat that we're going to tell you about, because we're going in alphabetical order, is Alabama, and most everybody thinks that the Democrats will probably lose that seat. So it's really 4 other Senate seats that they have to win just to get it to 50-50, and then that also is presuming that Biden and Harris win the presidency. So that's sort of to frame the thinking here. That's where we're at math-wise. And
we'll go in with a little more detail about.
Right, we've got some polls for later and things like that.
And stuff like that. But so, Mom.
Yeah, I just wanted, first of all, I would like to offer an apology to the Brain Trust Live listeners, because I had started a project back in before the presidential primary thing ended, where I flipped the Senate, and I was gathering all this information that was going to go onto the website about all of the different Senate races and how to adopt senators in other states if your state didn't have a Senate run, like California or New York. And then I got so discouraged when they took it from Bernie. I couldn't look at it. So I just want to apologize that I didn't do what I had planned to do.
Well, and then also some things have happened since then too, Carla. So
yeah. Oh yeah, no, but I mean, it would have been a perfect COVID project because you sit at the computer. But at any rate, yeah. So,
but let's start with Alabama. That's the one seat that the Democrats seem to be in danger of losing, and so that's really our most vulnerable Democrat on the map. So tell us about Alabama.
Well, I personally, and I'm wrong about these things, so you can't trust me, but I don't think Doug Jones is going to do as poorly as they say, because we haven't heard anything about that election. He's running against Tommy Tuberville.
Tuberville.
He's
a sports person, Brent. Tell us the right answer.
I'm honestly not sure.
I think it's Tuberville.
I know he's a football coach.
I think, you're right. It's Tuberville, very popular college football coach who we started to hear about him, and then we didn't hear very much because there were some issues. He's never served in government before, and there was some kind of weird things with him. But my feeling about Doug Jones is that Alabama has been poorly represented in that Senate seat for many, many years because Jeff Sessions was a high muckety muck in the Republican Party. So I suspect that it was a neglected district. And if Doug Jones has been doing his job, and I suspect that he has been doing his job, I think that he actually has a better chance than people are giving him credit for, because people do, I mean, it goes back in New York, what we call the Alphonse D'Amato approach, Alphonse D'Amato was elected and not very popular, but he took care of things in the state. And he was called Senator Pothole because you could call the Senate office in New York State. You had your potholes fixed. I think if he's doing that kind of stuff, I think he has a better chance than people are giving him.
I think, Carla, you're absolutely right, because, and especially, if this is a type of way of election that I think a lot of people are thinking that it has the potential to be, you've got Senate races in the South that we know are close. I feel like there's been sort of scant polling from that race because I think that a lot of people just sort of think that it's cooked. But yeah, you've got 2 close Senate races in Georgia. You've got a close Senate race supposedly in Mississippi. You've got a close one supposedly in South Carolina, North Carolina. There's no reason why that can't be at least close. So I don't think you're crazy at all.
That was a race that was won by turnout. That was a race where people organized the center, the center sort of part of the state where all the Democrats live, and got them to the polls. And it was won on the basis of turnout. And it was in part won because his opponent was a lunatic. But I would say that in this context, he also didn't have Trump running at that time, and they do now. So Tommy Tuberville is not just running as Tommy Tuberville, beloved football coach. He's running in a party that's framed by Donald Trump, who is also fringe lunatic-y. So some of the same factors are at play there that were at play when there was that special election that gave Doug Jones that seat. So
yeah, and I think we're going to find out a lot about the business of taking care of your constituents and taking care of your state in this election, because 11 of the candidates out of the 33 were all elected in 2014, and they were all a part of the Tea Party, and their hands were all tied because Mitch McConnell has not given them anything for the people. All they've done is voted for judges, but every piece of legislation that's come through Congress,
tax cuts for wealthy,
unless it's tax cuts. Well, tax cuts, yes, but every other piece of legislation that would improve the lives of people, of everyday people in the states, these people have not been able to do.
Sorry to interrupt you. You see that that's been borne out in a million different stories that you've read over the span of the last 6 to 8 months, specifically to do with COVID. There's a million different articles about Cory Gardner, who's, looks like he might lose in Colorado, begging and pleading with Senate leadership to pass something that he can go back to his constituents with. And McConnell has chosen not to do that. So I think you're absolutely right. I think some of these guys are going to get held accountable in ways that maybe they weren't even really expecting, just because the people in their state are fed up with the fact that they haven't done anything for them.
Right. And most of the people who are at risk are those people that came in at that time. There are also others at risk, but they're the main group of people who are at risk in this election.
Well, they're the fringiest members of the Senate too, in a lot of cases.
They are.
They were making big promises about reform and what we have. I mean, I guess things have reformed.
Right. And I think also, I think another thing that we need to remind people of and remember is every one of these people voted to acquit Trump in the impeachment trial. So everyone, I think now that's starting to kind of even, that could resonate now because, as Trump is going down and his incompetence has become really clear.
And as he hosts super spreader events across the nation.
Yeah, and hosts super spreader events. I think that means something, or it should, whether people will take it into consideration. But it's something to keep in mind. So that's
Alaska. That's Alabama, but let's move on to Alaska, because Alaska is a real dark horse race. We've been following this race longer than anyone I know. And also the Democrat who's running in it is a nonpartisan.
Right, he's independent.
And one of the main controversies in this race involves who shot a bear and who didn't.
Yeah, you know more about the bear story. I haven't followed the bear story.
I've been following the bear.
Yeah. Basically what happened, Dan Sullivan is one of these people who was elected in 2014. He grew up in Ohio, was born in Ohio. He has an East Coast pedigree. He went to Harvard and he's in Alaska. Dr. Al Gross is an orthopedic surgeon. I think he's retired from surgery right now, and a commercial fisherman who grew up in Alaska. And that's how he came into contact with a bear, which Lila, you can tell that story.
Yeah, here's what happened. Al Gross insists that, like the pure Alaskan that he is, he shot a bear. Mm-hmm. And Dan Sullivan and the Republican establishment have decided to run attack ads, not claiming that Al Gross represents policies that they don't approve of, not claiming that Al Gross is a fringe lunatic who wants to destroy American life as we know it, but insisting that he's lying about having shot a bear. A thing that really shouldn't resonate anywhere but Alaska.
Right.
But so in any case, there is a bit of a conversation going on right now in Alaska about whether or not Al Gross has shot a bear, and a lot of his credibility is resting on whether or not he has.
Right. They released like police reports from like when it actually happened, and like they've interviewed people who were there, and it's like turned into like this bear thing has taken on a whole
life of its own. Wow. But Al Gross is somebody who is polling within 1 point in some polls of Dan Sullivan. This is a race that seemed unwinnable early in the cycle. And I know you were following Al Gross because he's kind of quirky. And so you had been sort of keeping an eye on this race, but there was a moment where I think everyone else noticed it because the polling started to close up. And Al Gross could actually win, you guys.
Yeah, because also another part of it is the fact that one of the things he's pushing is he's from Alaska. Yeah. And Alaska, their other senator is an independent. She's not, she was the one, Murkowski lost.
She won a write-in candidacy.
She won a write-in candidacy. And I think that's the reason Al Gross is running as a nonpartisan candidate instead of as a Democrat. He will, if he gets to the Senate, he will caucus with the Democrats. But his positions on healthcare, he's a doctor after all, and also on the environment are strong positions that will be very comfortable within the Democratic Party. And I think that the people of Alaska are, I think they see him as one of their own, whereas Dan Sullivan is one of those people, like in Alaska, they have people like in California, these transplants who, who kind of come there. So
well, they have Alaska has a tradition of Sarah Palin's.
Right. Yeah.
So that's, and then Arizona, our next alphabetical state, also has an exciting race because that's Martha McSally's seat. She ran for the other Senate seat in 2010 and lost, but then got appointed to finish out John McCain's term. So she is someone who has recently lost in statewide office. And Mark Kelly, Gabby Gifford's husband / the astronaut, is running for the Democrats. And so that is a seat that most people think the Democrats could easily pick up.
Right. This is one of when they are looking at the math that we mentioned earlier and thinking of which 4 seats they are going to get. This is, at the top of the list.
Yeah. So this is a seat that seems like one of the more likely pickups for Democrats. A seat that the Democrats are definitely not going to pick up is Arkansas.
Well, I think that's going to come back to bite the Democrats.
It should.
Down the way, because they didn't find a candidate to run against Tom Cotton. And the problem with that is that Tom Cotton has his eyes on being president in 2024 or 2028, and he's a wackadoodle.
He's a nutbag.
He's a total nut. And
he's Trump, but like smart enough to string together sentences. I mean, he's not less crazy than that.
Well, no, he's not.
I mean, is he not who wrote an op-ed praising fascism in the New York Times just a few months ago? We're talking about he's a pro-fascist democratically elected representative.
Yeah, they should have found some kind of crash and burn candidate, if nothing else. You know what I mean?
This is, if you're a smart Democratic strategist, which there aren't any apparently, so don't worry about it. This is where you run a progressive so that you as a moderate can be like, progressives don't ever win anything. Look at what happened in Arkansas. But just in case, this is where you can run a fringe person. You can make the left happy. I mean, that's kind of what they think they're doing in with Marquita Bradshaw.
Tennessee.
And that has the benefit of building a Democratic movement inside the state. Even if the person crashes and burns totally, it builds some sort of infrastructure. But it also, as a moderate Democrat, as the DSCC, allows you to be like, well, see, you can't bring those people anywhere. So it's like a win-win for moderates. I don't know why they don't
But also,
try it. And it's a win-win for progressives too. It's a win. Everyone wins except Republicans.
But let's not forget that a previous president came from Arkansas. You know, Bill Clinton came from Arkansas.
Famously.
He hasn't been gone that long.
Hope, I believe, as a matter of fact.
Yes, exactly. But he has not been gone that long.
Arkansas
But he
shouldn't have lost cause.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's
if
there's
you're wondering
potential there.
why our current Democratic Party sounds like Republicans, it is because
somebody from Arkansas got elected president.
The modern Democrats were birthed in Arkansas.
Right.
I mean, good Lord, everyone.
Yeah.
Anyway, so another seat that looks, for all intents and purposes, like it could be a flip is Colorado.
This is one of the 4 also. Colorado. So far, we've seen Arizona and Colorado are on the big hit list.
Exactly. Cory Gardner is somebody who has tried desperately to frame himself as a moderate Republican because he knows he's in a very moderate state. Colorado is not a Republican state. So
not anymore.
Not anymore. No, they do elect Republicans statewide periodically, but they're a pretty middle of the road state. And also they go fringe left sometimes on specific policy. So you have Cory Gardner, who has been lost in the current Senate because all anyone can do is just be a yes man for the Trump movement. And then John Hickenlooper, who has won statewide there, obviously before.
Because he was the governor for
a couple terms, I think, actually.
Yeah, 2 terms.
And mayor of Denver, I think.
He has a bit of a Jerry Brown background where he's just sort of done all the jobs in the state at various times. But then also, we were mad about that primary because he swooped into that primary late after he was not going to become the president, which I could have told him he wasn't going to become before he declared. So I don't know why that was a surprise to anyone, but and then kind of sewed up the primary after everyone else had been trying to run for months and failing. But it does, that is a race that he should be able to win. Cory Gardner is in a really awkward spot. So that seems like a seat we could easily pick up.
Yeah.
And that's maybe if you're someone who is looking for states to get interested in the Senate race in that are not going to stress you out too much, that feel like Arizona and Colorado are where to look if you're looking to help flip seats, but you don't want to be stressed out by the chance that by the idea that you might lose. If you want to, it's like being a Yankees fan,
Right. But also these are very kind of traditional Democrats.
Yes.
They're not Democrats.
They're not exciting.
They're not. I mean, Mark Kelly does have his work with on the gun situation that's very strong. And so he will bring in a better voice for that. But
John Hickenlooper is a non-entity of a Democrat.
Right.
One seat that is up but is not going to be lost and is really not even worth discussing is in Joe Biden's home state of Delaware, the tax haven of Delaware, as I like to call it, which is Chris Coons, one of his most ardent supporters' seat. And Chris Coons will probably keep that seat and is one of the more boring Democrats that you could elect to anything. But, safe Democratic seat. Let's move on to Georgia, where both of their seats are up. Georgia is both the most exciting and most disappointing of the potential flip seats. Let's begin with David Perdue's seat. Let me just, before we begin, actually, express how this race basically summarizes exactly what is wrong with national Democratic strategy on every level. And if you are interested in a race that is winnable, but you are not interested in supporting the Democratic machine's idiotic attempts to be bigger idiots than they've been in the past, I wouldn't donate to this race, even though it's close. Because the Democratic candidate in this race is Jon Ossoff. Remember him from losing the most expensive special election in the history of special elections?
Yeah, if that wasn't the most expensive special election, then you would definitely have. No, I was saying, but if it hadn't been, then you would definitely have forgotten him. Because he's also one of the most forgettable humans that has ever ran for anything.
His hometown newspaper came out against him in that race because he was forgettable.
That's right. We talked about
he was hit by his own newspapers told voters not to vote for him because he was not memorable enough.
Yeah.
Right. But also that seat, he lost the seat. And then a year later, a woman, Lucy McBath, won the seat.
Right. It was a winnable seat.
Right.
It was a winnable seat by a candidate who could be remembered for more than 3 seconds.
Right. Well, and he's not the only Senate candidate that we have who lost their last congressional race in sort of embarrassing fashion.
MJ Hager.
Oh, and Amy McGrath.
And Amy McGrath,
Yeah.
So we are really, I mean, we're really banking on some known losers.
The Democratic Senate strategy seems to be to take high-profile losers and put them into even more high-profile races.
Right.
Which is the most insane. I mean, we have like a whole slate of these people running.
Yeah.
And then the second seat, Kelly Loeffler's seat, is real complicated because Loeffler, that's an appointed seat, first of all. That's why they're having a special election this year. Kelly Loeffler was one of the people that got wrapped up in that insider trading scandal. So she did a big stock transfer after getting early COVID info. And in a Senate hearing. And that was, a lot of people got wrapped up in that, including our own Dianne Feinstein. But Kelly Loeffler was one of the main known inside traders. They had a Democrat who was running for that seat, Raphael Warnock, who is kind of fun. I donated to him. But they have a spoiler in the race because Joe Lieberman's son has decided to enter the race as well. It's, first of all, the Lieberman family is like America's foremost spoilers.
Yeah.
In just all senses. Like the Liebermans they're professional election ruiners is what they are. What
a legacy.
Yeah. And this is not the only election that they're doing their damage with in this cycle, because Joe is doing the same thing in Maine.
Oh yeah, he endorsed Susan Collins.
Yeah.
That's right. I forgot about that.
Joe Lieberman is a Democrat who is a known Republican.
Yeah.
So the problem with Joe Lieberman,
he
became a Republican finally.
He spoiled his own presidential election.
Right.
Really.
Yeah.
I mean,
he's the only person known in history who has decided to become a Republican instead of become a Democrat as the party has moved into fringe right territory.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, he's a nonsense person. So in any case, in that race, we're endorsing Warnock.
Right.
Because
there are like 15 candidates. It's a jungle primary.
Right. It's a jungle primary.
And then there'll be a runoff, I think January 5th.
Yeah. Right. Because there are other Republicans running as well, right?
There are. And Loeffler is barely holding on to second place also.
Yeah.
In the latest polls on that.
She could easily lose that seat. I don't know if a Republican will lose that seat, but that seat is in play for sure. And it's
the other candidate, the other big Republican candidate is Doug Collins, who you will remember from hearings earlier this year. He was one of the obnoxious Republicans on one of that House committees, but he left the House to run for this seat. And so he's a real Trump, they're both, serious Trump people.
Yeah,
totally.
She's trying to walk away a little bit now, but.
Well, you would be trying to if you were trying to run in a seat that could flip. Let's talk about Idaho.
Oh, Idaho. Idaho's candidate, Democratic candidate, is a woman by the name of Paulette Jordan. She is the most adorable woman running for Senate this time.
So if you're looking for an adorable candidate to support.
Yeah, so if you're looking, she ran for governor the last time, 2 years ago, and was in the state legislature before that. She's got good positions, but she's also an American Indian. And I think she is the only American Indian candidate running for the Senate. The man she's running against, Jim Reich, is a 77-year-old white man who doesn't really do much. I contacted my cousin who lives in Idaho because no one's talking about this race. And I think everyone should be talking about it, because if she wins, it
should be the first Native American woman to be in the Senate, right?
Yeah, and we learned what happened last time in 2018 when 2 Native American women were elected to the House. Everybody fell in love with it, the idea with them and all that.
And also, it also seems like in a place like Idaho, like, first of all, obviously it's bad enough that there are not Native American representatives in the Senate, but certainly a place like Idaho, where that's, a part of the culture of the state, that should be a seat that's in play, at least.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And especially because she's running against, a kind of a very bland, boring.
So wait, what did our cousin say?
He said that he knows Republicans who are planning to vote for her. He was so surprised that I knew who she was, that I asked about her. He said, yeah, I really like her. She's great. And yeah, I know some people who are Republicans, and they're so fed up with the way things are going. They're planning to vote for her. The thing that's been disappointing to me is they get a lot of Hollywood money in there because of Sun Valley and those areas. And I feel badly that they have not started putting money into that campaign, and everybody should know about it because it's exciting. But and
you're doing your best.
Will be fabulous if she wins.
Oh, well, that's one that could be like, because no one is really paying attention to it. That's like that could be a dark horse kind of, she could have a much better showing than we expect.
Yeah,
because
no one's paying any attention
to it.
Yeah. But that's who I send money to.
Right.
And I would encourage you all to do the same.
Now, Dick Durbin is up in Illinois. That isn't really going to be a race. So let's move on to Iowa.
Right.
Joni Ernst is up. And Joni Ernst is vulnerable.
I mean, she would have to be. I mean, this, I think, is one that people think that maybe is winnable, and maybe it is, but I mean, they are really banking on people not liking Joni Ernst and just general, disdain for how the country is going right now. And only that, because Teresa Greenfields is really just a big nothing. God bless her. I hope she wins. But I mean, they couldn't have gone in a more. Well, I mean,
they could have Bruce Braley. They could have picked Bruce Braley himself, the man who taught us about their strategy.
Right. Exactly. So we'll see how that goes. I'm not having much hope about that, considering the way that state has been going in the last few election cycles, which is, sad for me as a person who grew up with statewide Democrats elected.
Right. A man of Tom Harkin.
Most of my 22 years being alive and in the state. But I don't know. We'll see.
Well, the state party there seems to be wildly incompetent on a level that is really only found in the national Democrats.
Right.
And like all the other states, there were good progressive candidates running in that primary.
There were.
There was a woman, I can't remember her name, but she was a strong progressive. And the party came along and put their thumb on the lever to make sure that, Chuck's faves.
I think that is like kind of I think they're taking the wrong message from their losses, where it's almost like they're like, well, if a Bruce Braley can't win, we got to get even more boring. We got to go.
Honestly, we talked about this on the podcast. I think when that primary was going on, no one knows how she became the favored candidate for. She's not run for anything before. She's like in real estate or something like that.
Yeah, she ran for Congress in 2018 and pulled out of the race. Because because she didn't file the papers. She did something, I can't remember what it was. But
so she had an administrative issue on top of.
No, she was going to run I can't remember whose seat she was going to run for Congress, and then.
But there was like a former military person running in that Democratic primary. The DSCC loves a former military person. I think a lot of people are still sort of confused about how Teresa Greenfield is the candidate in Iowa right now.
She probably was the one who could bring in the money, because that's what the Democrats do.
And I think that's true, because I think she has a real estate background or something like that. So she could probably.
Yeah, so they thought she would be the one who would be able to bring in the money.
Get that sweet Des Moines developer money.
Right, and that leads us to the next one. Oh, no, that doesn't. Next is Kansas.
Next is Kansas, where, well, my mom and I have been talking about Kansas a bit because Kansas, listen, they're probably going to vote for the Republican Roger Marshall. However, Kansas has been burned by Republicans in the last few years in a way that is wildly extreme, in a way where their Republican-led legislature had to, overturn policy that the Republican governor had enacted because it was.
Well, I was going to say it led to a Democratic governor. They have a Democratic governor there right now. So they're not so far removed from having elected a statewide Democrat there.
Right.
Now, the downside is their Democratic candidate is a former Republican.
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah. Barbara Bollier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't she a doctor or something?
Yeah,
they both are doctors. They're both doctors.
Okay.
Yeah. But that's one to keep your eye on, just because Kansas has been fairly unpredictable because their experiment with Republicanism went so far afield.
Yeah.
That they are certainly a state where people might do anything. We don't know what they do.
We don't know what they're going to do. Right.
And that brings us to Kentucky, a state where we do know what they're going to do. And the reason we know is because they're going to do what they did the last time that we put Amy McGrath up in a high profile seat and not vote for her.
Right.
And then we cough.
Yeah. That's exactly what they're going to do.
One of the things with Kentucky that is can I mention another podcast?
Yeah.
I listen to Trillbilly Workers Party, which is a podcast from Whitesburg, Kentucky, with these three very progressive people. It's like your podcast. It's it's millennials who do it, but they say that she is. They've said from the very beginning that she is a disaster. They supported Charles Booker, though he wasn't their favorite candidate.
Sure.
There was a sportscaster who couldn't get any. He tried for a year and a half to get a meeting with Chuck Schumer, and finally did. And Chuck Schumer said, "No, well, we have our candidate. We just won't blackball your people if they." And he dropped out. Now he would have won it. There's no question he would win this against McConnell. But this was a case where the Democratic campaign committee, the Senate campaign committee, just went in there and they knew better, and they raised huge amounts of money for her.
Yeah.
Massive amounts of money.
Early on, before the primary was over, so that by the time that she was able to blow out anyone else in the primary, largely on the basis of her longtime monetary advantage.
Yeah. Right. And they say on Trillbilly, they say she's 15 points behind, not 4 or 5.
Oh, that's what most people.
Yeah.
There's not anybody who is actually watching that race who would look. All of us would like Mitch McConnell to not be in the Senate any longer.
He's very unpopular in Kentucky. Yeah.
Sure.
But she's even more unpopular.
Yeah.
That
Amy McGrath is going to lose, especially in a presidential year in Kentucky. Amy McGrath is going to lose. She's going to lose by double digits. And if you've got $25 and only $25, do not let it go to Amy McGrath. No. She doesn't need it.
Speaking of other podcasts, Crooked Media has their Get Mitch or Die Trying fund, which has been raising just huge amounts of money. And one of my friends helps manage that, their Vote Save America operation. And I was like, "You're not giving any of that money to Amy McGrath though, right?" And she was like, "No."
Right.
That they're not, even a fund called Get Mitch or Die Trying is not
giving money,
donating, because that race is so cooked. So I wouldn't even venture a glance at it, but just know that our only way to get rid of Mitch McConnell is to win back the Senate in other places. It is not to hope that Amy McGrath beats him.
Right.
Yeah.
That doesn't get rid of our problem.
Yeah.
Louisiana, as always, doing what we're going to forget every year. Every 2 years they do this, and every 2 years we forget until election day when we find out we don't know who won, because they do basically a jungle primary on election day and then have a runoff in December. And so we never find out what's going on in Louisiana. Louisiana's up to all sorts of things, by the way, you guys. At one point they were restoring voting rights, just out of the blue. They're like fringe Republicans who periodically do these weird progressive things. Their voting system is very unique, but they have a Saturday election day there for the primary, I think. They have all sorts of stuff going on in Louisiana that makes no sense given the political context there. Bill Cassidy going to win that seat again.
Yeah, right.
But it's always exciting to know what's going on in Louisiana because it's usually one surprising thing, at least.
Right.
Yeah.
And they also now they've been dealing with serious weather this fall.
Yes.
Double.
So, I mean, that could change the whole thing. It could be gone by the time.
Right. There might not be a Louisiana
right.
on election day,
Yeah.
or certainly by December. So we don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, I think this is the most hurricanes that they've had make landfall.
Yeah.
I think ever, maybe, right? Or something
it's
crazy like that. Yeah.
Well, of course, in 2020, what else would happen?
Yeah.
This is the year that all the hurricanes would come too.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Maine.
Ugh.
I know. Now, there's good news and bad news in Maine. The good news is it really does look like Sarah Gideon might rid us of the Susan Collins problem. I don't know how much it buys us because Sarah Gideon is so thoroughly mediocre herself, but I do feel like it is positive that the message that sends to moderate Republicans is you can't actually have it both ways. Right. You cannot say you're moderate and support the Trump movement. If we're in a moderate state, then we can have a moderate representative, which they will have no matter who they win here, except that Susan Collins has been walking around. She had this ridiculous article in Politico where she was trying to frame herself as the victim of attacks, even though they have been warning her for literal years. They've been fundraising for any unnamed opponent for her for literal years. They threatened her with this when she made that Kavanaugh vote. They said, we're going to start, if you vote for this man, we are going to start a fund and we are going to make sure your opponent has tons and tons of money. They did. I mean, she's been warned for years. So I don't know what, now she's like giving all these quotes to Politico about how sad it is that people aren't taking her side of the story. And it's like, your side of the story does not exist. It's happening in public. We know what your side of the story is. It's that you're weak-willed and you've been voting with the Trump movement and you're in an awkward spot. But the thing to do when you're in that awkward spot is become an independent so that you don't have to vote with the Trump movement. And, if you were going to have a well-funded, opposition either way, because maybe the risk is the Trump movement primaries her, then figure out what's your best bet in that situation. It's not to move farther to the right in Maine. Maine already had, because of LePage, they have like no interest in this kind of lunacy. Like they have their own kind of lunacy in Maine, but like I don't think this Trump style lunacy is really what they're looking for there after their own experiment with it. That's why, I mean, they have the most progressive voting system in the country because of their experiment with Paul LePage. Yeah. So I wouldn't give money to this race, but I would keep your eye on it because it does look, for all intents and purposes, like Susan Collins is going to lose her seat, and she deserves to, no matter who it's to.
Yeah, and one thing we should say with this about the money thing is that the people were saying you don't need to, don't necessarily send your money there. They've gotten so much money. People like her, like Amy McGrath and Sarah Gideon.
Sarah Gideon has enough money.
Yeah.
If she doesn't win, it's not because she didn't have enough money. It's because she didn't have enough voters or positions on anything.
Yeah. But there are other people who can use the money. Right. And if nothing else, it sends a message to the Democrats.
Yeah, I think so too.
So here's three Democratic incumbents that are either safe or likely safe. Ed Markey, very safe, after fending off that ridiculous primary challenger.
Joe Kennedy.
We were fairly certain that Ed Markey is going to go back, get reelected. Gary Peters in Michigan he's likely, that district, I mean, that state leans fairly Democratic. It obviously, because it's a presidential year, there's some risk always because it's a little bit unpredictable as a presidential state. But
they also, they recruited an ex-military guy who's Black and is trying to, they're looking at this as a possible gain for them. Yeah, but the thing I found interesting is that he calls his people who, the fundraisers for him, his co-pilots. Because they have,
people love a cheesy joke,
Yeah, right. But they see, they see Doug Jones as the most vulnerable, but they think that this is not safe, but it's hard to.
Yeah, it really depends on what the momentum in the state in general is looking like.
Yeah, and he was the only Democrat, by the way, who was elected in 2014.
So he actually did fend off the worst year of Republican.
Yeah. I don't know who he ran against, but that's
And then we have Minnesota also, Tina Smith's seat, also leans Democratic, but it's not. Minnesota's always
Well, Minnesota is on the list. You've seen Trump go there. I think
Yeah.
even recently is on the list of, I think he lost there by like 4 points in 2016. That is on his list of places that he would like to get back. You know, you hear about all these places that Democrats might be able to flip, whether it's Arizona
and that's why
or Michigan
so
or
many
Pennsylvania. But
of their representatives are self-isolating is because they've been hanging out with Donald Trump on Air Force One.
Yeah, and Jason Lewis, who is the man who's running against her, is one of those people. He's self-isolating for the next 2 weeks because he was on Air Force One.
Yeah,
that trip.
right. So this is a state where if you throw out Tina Smith, you might be at risk of all of your representatives contracting COVID at all times. So keep that in mind. Mississippi, though, this is an exciting one because this is in play, Mississippi, and it is in play. Mike Espy is the Democratic candidate. He was the Secretary of Agriculture under Clinton, but he would be the he was the first African American to be elected in Mississippi to Congress, since Reconstruction, right? And that was one of his claim to fame. He was in Congress. And Cindy Hyde-Smith, noted racist, is his opponent, and she's been kind of seeing her star wane in the polls lately.
Yep.
That's one to give money to.
Yes.
There was an exciting there were more progressive people in that primary, but it was Mississippi, so it was like, what were we expecting? But Mike Espy is like for Mississippi, like a fairly decent candidate for progressive Democrats to decide to support. He's not.
He would be a reliable Democrat.
He'd be a reliable Democrat, yeah. And that would be also in the order of us picking up Alabama that time we did.
Right.
Would be a pretty exciting and shocking win. So.
Well, and this is the type of thing too, where, I think that the National Democrats are finally getting some help down there this week. I read an article because they had not been, but so they are obviously seeing signs that there's something going on down there. But this is, besides the political reasons that make this like a good thing to just be having a candidate like in a place like Mississippi, whether it's helping build a movement or whatever it is, it also is forcing national Republicans to go down and spend some money to help Cindy Hyde-Smith, which they were not expecting at all. We've got a story coming up in a little bit about how national Republicans are spending $20 million in some of these southern states that, probably 3 months ago, they would not have been expecting that they were going to have to spend one single solitary penny on. So that's another reason to send money to Mike Espy, like just make them fend that off.
Yeah. That's and make them waste all of the money in the whole world on races that they didn't expect to have to do that with.
Yeah.
Because they are doing that in some places.
Right. We want to, drain their resources.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So then we have the Montana race, where depending on what poll you look at, you get a wildly different idea of what's going on there. It's Steve Bullock is running for that seat against Steve Daines, who is leading in the polls, kind of, unless you look at other polls where, for the most part, Daines is leading in the polls as in kind of average, but there are polls coming out that have that race tied, basically. So
how are the polls in Montana so all over the place? There's only so many people in Montana to poll in the first place.
Who can know anything about anything? Like, I think the more reliable polls show him in the lead, but there are polls that show that lead being much smaller than some of the other polls. And then there are a few polls where Bullock is up. Now, I don't know what you do in a situation where the polls are this all over the place. I'm looking at 538 right now, and there are 2 polls listed from October 7th, one that has Daines up by 9 and one that has Bullock up by 1. So like, I don't even know what you do with a spread like that. But
also Bullock is the governor.
Right.
So he has one statewide
office before.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think it's worth believing that Bullock could, he's another ex-presidential candidate who should have always been focused on the Senate seat.
Yeah.
But he is somebody that I think it's worth keeping an eye on that race because no one really knows what's going on with it, but it is a potential pickup for the Democrats if we play our cards right. Nebraska is not a potential pickup. That's Ben Sass's seat. Let's not worry about it.
Yeah.
New Hampshire, pretty safe. That's
Jean Shaheen.
Jean Shaheen's seat, and that's a pretty safe seat. So let's not worry about that. New Jersey, Cory Booker's seat. Not even going to get into it. He's going to win that. I'm not going to worry about it. New Mexico is an open seat. It was a
Held by a
Democratic
Democrat.
seat.
Right.
It was a Democratic seat. But we know New Mexico can go in any of many directions when it comes to voting statewide. You have Ben Ray Lujan, who isn't he related to Michelle Lujan Grisham?
Oh, I don't know.
I don't know.
I think there's I'm thinking there is definitely a candidate running either for Congress or for Senate or something that is related to another high profile candidate.
Sure.
New Mexico is apparently a dynasty state and we didn't know about it.
Yeah.
Mark Ronchetti is his conservative opponent. He's fairly new to politics. Ben Ray Lujan's been in Congress since 2006, so he's a known congressional entity there. But I haven't actually seen any polling recently on that seat. I wonder if that is something I could be looking up this exact moment, because I'm realizing I hadn't. Oh, that seat is the polls are showing that as a safe Democratic seat.
Great.
Now
Let's go with that.
So let's go with that.
Yeah.
So let's not worry about it. Mostly because I want to get back to the state so we can talk about North Carolina.
Yeah.
This race is a shit show, you guys. Tom Tillis, the same day that we found out he had COVID, we also found out that there was a sexting scandal with Cal Cunningham, his opponent. It's, in my mom's words, one of the more puritanical sexting scandals.
I love that. That's
out
so
there.
good.
That's the perfect description of what it is. Because this is a sexting scandal that has no teeth if you actually read the sexts, because they have no sex in them. They're just texts about how nice it would be to kiss somebody. Which is like, well, we're all in quarantine. Probably everyone text anyone with that information right now.
Right.
But Tom Tillis, not popular. It was looking like he was really in some real danger. And then he announced that he had gotten COVID at the White House super spreader event.
Yep.
But then that same week, Cal Cunningham had the sexting scandal. And while I know that wouldn't play well, I mean, that wouldn't really play here. I don't know what goes on in North Carolina.
I think that this is, I mean, look, Cunningham was up. If you look at the polls, he's been up in polls the entire time and remains up in polls by maybe a little bit less since this sexting scandal has happened. And if you're Cal Cunningham, would you rather not have a sexting scandal? Probably, right? But that can't be what moves that election. And I don't think that it will be, actually. I think that it
might be a blip in the election.
The whole world right now is fucking falling apart. And that's what we're voting on in this election. We're not voting on whether Cal Cunningham said that he might like to maybe kiss someone sometime. Like that, it's just not, I don't think it's going to move anything. Also, they've been voting there for weeks.
Well, and also North Carolina is a state that has had their voice undercounted repeatedly because of crazy gerrymandering and all sorts of crazy nonsense scandals. That's a state where I would think voters are just sick of this shit.
Right. Biden is up by double digits there. The Democratic governor is up by 1 million points there.
Yeah,
if you look at all of the polls Cunningham is up by less than that. But I just can't imagine all of these North Carolinians going and voting for Joe Biden and the Democratic candidate, and then for Tom Tillis, who's a garbage person.
Right. Yeah. Well, and Cunningham had been early on, a few weeks ago, he had been tracking like other Democrats.
Well, he was ahead by 12, 15 points.
Right. He was ahead by in the teens. And there are still a couple of polls showing him in the double digits, just barely. Most of the polls have it closer to
5 or 6%. Right. Yeah.
But I see that probably growing back once everyone.
I think so too. That's going to be a non-issue.
Once everyone reads the sexts and is like, wait a minute, is this a man who just said it would be nice to kiss this random consultant in California? Because I don't know if I actually care about that.
Yeah.
It sounds more scandalous until you've read the sexts.
Yeah.
And then what you find out is they're not really sexts. They're just texts.
But also Tom Tillis was one of the ones who actually may have spread COVID-19 to the Senate Judiciary Committee.
Right.
Yeah.
None of them will take tests anymore because
they don't want to have to.
Right. But he was involved in that.
Exactly. Yeah. So we have Oklahoma's seat is up, Inhofe seat. there
That's
is a
safe.
Democratic opponent there, Abby Broyles, but it's a safe seat. Oregon, Jeff Merkley's seat, also safe. Rhode Island, Jack Reed, also safe. South Carolina, a seat that has so much going for it and yet so little. That's Lindsey Graham's seat. Lindsey Graham, who I believe is the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee and is actively working to spread coronavirus to all of their age 80-something members. They don't have 80-something members, but they have all of the oldest people in the Senate are on that committee. So he's actively working to kill half of the Senate by refusing to get a coronavirus test, something that we're going to talk about this week. But also, Jamie Harrison, his opponent, who is the only corporate Democrat that I gave money to just because I wanted to stick it to Lindsey Graham.
Right.
Is raising money on a level that Lindsey Graham, by the way, a man who has been begging for money all over Fox News for weeks. There's great supercuts all over the internet of him just like begging for money everywhere. Yeah. Jamie Harrison raised $57 million in the last quarter, which not only beat Beto O'Rourke's previous record of that in 2018, but just like shattered it because the record was $38 million.
Yeah.
He just raised $57 million. People are sick to death of Lindsey Graham.
Yeah, it's so good.
And also, that would be a state that would be, if Jamie Harrison won, it would be the first state ever to be represented by 2 African-American senators.
Yeah, the state that started the Civil War.
Right. Tim Scott is the other senator there. But that race is real close, like tied in a literal way where every poll shows only, shows like Harrison up 1, Graham up 1. So it's like truly a tied race. Yeah. And I think we can all agree that we as Americans are sick to death of Lindsey Graham and would like South Carolina to just like do us the solid that Kentucky won't do us, and just like let this guy out of here. Who has time anymore?
Yeah.
South Dakota, Mike Round's seat, no news there. He's going to win that seat. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Tennessee, look, is this seat likely going to be won by a Republican? Sure. I'm not going to argue you there. But this is a seat that is exciting for other reasons. This is an open seat. And it was in a surprise move won by Marquita Bradshaw, a progressive Democrat. So they have an actual progressive running as a Democrat there.
Yep.
And Bill Hagerty, who's running as the Republican, is like a real old-timey and Trump-aligned Republican. And look, it's Tennessee, so I'm not trying to get your hopes up. However, this is the kind of thing that we're saying that they should be doing in some of these quote-unquote hopeless seats where they should try something. Listen, we know that a boring moderate Democrat couldn't win this seat, but we don't know what happens when you run a progressive in Tennessee. We've never tried it. So, and Marquita Bradshaw is fun, you guys. She wears fun glasses. She is an actual progressive.
She's a community organizer.
Right. She's a community organizer. So she might be someone who can pull out some votes from places that don't traditionally vote. That's, if we've learned anything about community organizers, it's that they find new voters. Whereas moderate, safe, boring, run-of-the-mill Democrats just keep working with the same lists they've always been working with.
Right.
But someone in Marquita Bradshaw's position cannot just rely on a Democratic list from Tennessee. No. She's going to have to look for new voters. But so that's a race where, look, I'm not promising that she'll win anything, but you should definitely pay attention to the margin in that race. The margin is really important, because if she loses by a smaller margin than Democrats have traditionally been losing that seat, it's worth taking notice. And this also gives gives progressives a chance to really build a statewide movement there, which is always worth it, because it trickles down to, local offices. So thumbs up to that. You should send her money. If you have money you're trying to send around, why not? Send her money.
Yep. Texas,
John Cornyn's seat. This is another seat of a loser Democrat that we've repurposed.
Right.
MJ Hager went viral because she made one great campaign ad. And listen,
it was
a
We're
good
not
ad.
here to,
not here to shit on that ad. That was a great ad. But that is literally the strength of her candidacy is entirely just one ad that she made when she was running for Congress in 2018.
Yeah. And that, again, if she ends up winning, it will, again, be just sort of because there is some sort of like blue wave coming out of Texas.
Yeah,
because there's a lot of polls that have like Biden close there. I mean,
yes,
that may
Biden
be one
is close there.
That may be one place where the Senate Democrat is actually helped by Joe Biden.
Right. Yeah, because currently, I mean, Cornyn has been serving in that seat forever, by comparison to some of these other candidates, and then also, or serving at least in Congress for Texas forever, because I think he came from the House. I can't remember.
Yeah.
But he's up by 8 or 9 in most recent polls there. But he was up by less as recently as last week. So that race is moving around a bit, and it does look like Biden is closing a gap there. So listen, Texas remains an opportunity for us if we're willing to take it.
Yeah.
So definitely keep your eye on that race.
Yeah.
Virginia, Mark Warner seat, not a story.
No.
West Virginia, Shelley Moore Capito is probably going to keep that seat.
Right.
But it's worth watching the rhetoric out of West Virginia always, because that's
Yeah,
an
and
interesting
Paula Jean
state.
Swearingen is also one. She was one of the knock down the house
Right.
candidates. She lost her primary in 2018 for whatever she was running for. I can't remember, but she won this time around. She's been endorsed by Sanders. She is another sort of like fun candidate, kind of like in the Marquita Bradshaw kind of like will probably lose, but it's a progressive. So she's another one that I would say, like, you know, if you've got money rolling around.
And also that's another one to pay attention to the margin, because
yes, agreed.
You know, we tend to, West Virginia famously sends us Democrats of the most conservative variety.
Right.
But West Virginia is a labor state. It's a state that has some weird progressive politics baked into its history. So it's a state that could do anything. Anything could happen in West Virginia. Also, it's by far the most beautiful state in the entire union. And it's a shame that it's been represented by idiots for so long.
I know.
Because it's truly like the most beautiful state you could visit in the entire United States.
Yeah.
Wyoming has an open seat, likely to go to the Republican, but it's always exciting to have an open seat, I guess. And Wyoming is a state that theoretically Kanye West lives in. So, you know, we don't know what's going on. So,
man,
those are all the seats that are up.
Yes.
We need to win 3 to 4 to make up for a potential Doug Jones loss, if in fact he does.
Right.
But we are possibly able to do that.
Yeah, we're in a much better position than they are. And Carla, you sort of flagged that article for us from earlier today about how, you know, the Republicans are panicked about this because, you know, if you can sort of assume that, let's just assume that Doug Jones loses, even though we think maybe that might be closer than everybody thinks it's going to be. So then you need 4 seats. You feel like you've got Arizona and Colorado pretty much on lock, and that Maine seat is looking pretty good per the polling. So you really, if you're the Republicans, you have to defend all of those other seats. And if the Democrats, you only need to pick up 1. And there's close races, as we told you, in Iowa, in North Carolina. There's 2 in Georgia. There's 1 in Alaska. There's 1 in Mississippi. There's 1 in Montana, Kansas, Texas. The Republicans have to run all of those.
Yeah.
And that's why they're panicked, because it doesn't seem like they probably will.
That seems
I
like
think
quite
there's
a tall.
at least 9 potential state seats, and
that's a much better map than we had going into this year. Where
everybody thought that this map was going to not be good again for us. To try and get this back.
I mean, there's been some like the last few years have been interesting, because do you remember not that long ago when the current congressional map was put together and everyone thought, oh my God, the Democrats will never hold the House ever again. And then suddenly it's like, we're not even worried about the House now. We're definitely going to win the House. So like, don't even pay attention.
But also I think it was prior to 2014, they used to say there would never be a time when the Republicans would control the Senate.
Right.
And that was the race that flipped it. But, you know, I think that
all this is to say anything is possible always.
Right.
So you should just get people elected. You should run people so that you can get them elected.
Right. Yeah. And if there's anything that the Democrats nationally could possibly pull off, it would be to lose all of those other 9 Senate seats.
That's true.
So keep doing the work.
Right.
Out there,
if anyone has ever been experienced at losing a full slate of possible seats, at a time that victory was just within reach.
Well,
It would be the Senate Democrats. So
yeah, the theory that
don't count them out.
yeah, they promote on Trillbilly Workers Party is that the Democrats have never gotten as much money as they've gotten since Trump was elected. So they just want to keep that going. You know, it's like,
I mean,
right, yeah,
they
right.
are currently the party du jour of all of Wall Street. So this has been a real boon to their fundraising capabilities. You're seeing record after record get set by these candidates, and
yeah.
in both large and small dollar donation frames. I mean, no matter what you look at, we're setting records fundraising. Turns out you can't beat the power of dark money from large corporations who want to write laws to suit themselves. Doesn't matter how much of Wall Street thinks that you would be safer for the economy, because you can't count out Walmart, but whatever, you know, you try is what I'm saying. Here's some recent polls that will make you feel good or bad. I don't know. They'll make you feel fine. Greenfield is up in Iowa right now, according to YouGov.
Most polls. I mean, they're close.
Most polls have her up. Yeah. But it's by under 5 points. So it's still, you know, nearing the margin of error, but that is a good sign, because it's always, I mean, it's harder to beat an incumbent than to not, especially when you're the Earth's most boring human being. So, so that's good news. Ossoff is tied with Purdue, and look, that's like a brick being tied with Purdue. I mean, he brings literally nothing to the table. So that fact that he can be tied with Purdue should really be taken as an indictment on Purdue's time in office and association with the Trump movement. It has nothing to do with anything John Ossoff is doing, because you can remember what John Ossoff is doing. You can't remember his face. He's someone I have face blindness towards, by the way, because I saw a photo of him recently in the news and I was like, who is this guy? There was a time where his face was in the news every day.
It was everywhere.
Everywhere. And I was reading the news at that time, and I just saw his face again. And I was just like, I've never seen this in my life. I've never seen this man before in my life. And it was John Ossoff. I feel similarly about Connor Lamb. Every time I see Connor Lamb's face, I'm just like, who is this guy?
Oh, yeah.
It's always Connor fucking Lamb every time. In any case, Raphael Warnock is ahead in that runoff, but probably won't get 50%. So who knows what's going to happen, because that is a real wild card of a race.
Because Loeffler could also lose.
Right. Loeffler could lose. It could be two complete strangers that are running for that seat.
Yeah.
And he's actually the one who should have run against Purdue.
Yeah. Yeah, they should have switched that.
Yeah, because he's the minister at the Ebenezer Church in Atlanta. He's the one who conducted John Lewis's funeral. So he's very articulate and very smart, and a strong candidate.
Definitely. That's going to be an interesting one because of all of the late entries. Mark Kelly has been up by nearing double digits for a while. I think.
Yeah. And Martha McSally just made a straight fool of herself in the debate this last week. I don't know. Have you guys seen the clips of that debate where I
saw headlines about it. I haven't watched it yet.
And God bless the moderator. Whoever was moderating that should start moderating more things, because in the presidential level, we've had two crap moderators. We're going to talk about the second one here in the next story. But she got asked whether she was proud of President Donald Trump, and she meandered her way all the way around that in a way that was actually almost impressive. And he interrupted her no less than 10 times to get her to clarify as to whether that was a yes or a no, which she never did clarify.
Well,
and it was
to clarify. It's
truly embarrassing. I mean, it was that's Martha McSally.
And then in Maine, the Bangor Daily News has them at a tie, but most polling has Sarah Gideon up. So we'll see. It's hard to know because they have ranked choice voting there. So who knows what anyone can possibly think about anything in Maine. But some other ballot news for you that could bring this problem to more voters in a good way.
I was going to say, this is a great, this is an opportunity that we're bringing to them, not a problem.
Sorry. bring this polling problem, but voting opportunity to more states. Both Alaska and Massachusetts are voting on ranked choice voting this year.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
And obviously we're still going to do our props, but we dropped the ball on doing the props special this week, but we are going to do it. I mean, last week, but we are going to do it this week. And we are going to talk about props in other states that you should keep your eye on as well, because although we are, of course, naturally obsessed with the California props. There's always something exciting going on the ballot in your own state, if you dream hard enough. So in any case, we mentioned that Republicans are having to rush money into some unexpected states, and we hope that they continue to have to waste all of their money on that, because that would mean that we can use up their resources on races like Lindsey Graham that they presumed would be safe until it turned out that they were running lunatics.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the VP debate.
Let's do it.
Listen, it was pretty boring. I'm not going to lie to you guys. I'm not going to sugarcoat it.
Yeah.
Was it a welcome change to not have Donald Trump be there? Sure. It's always great when Donald Trump isn't on your TV. But the main takeaway and there were two takeaways, I would say. One is that Mike Pence doesn't think that we have any, that there's racism in America.
Right.
The other is that a fly landed on his head halfway through the debate and just sat there for what felt like hours.
While he was trying to explain that. So you may have missed him trying to explain that there isn't any racism in America, because that is literally when the fly sat on him.
Yeah. He is a person who apparently unwittingly participated in an act of genius symbolism during which a fly circled on his head and landed on it while he was giving the most garbage answer that has ever been given by a person on the debate stage. Listen, we know he talked over Kamala just like Donald Trump talked over Joe Biden, but he did it in his very sedate way. So it didn't seem as schoolyard, but it did get under everyone's skin.
Yeah.
Because of that, Kamala Harris had time for hours worth of side eye, which
a lot of good reactions.
A lot of good reaction shots. The moderator did next to nothing to stop Pence from talking over her. So a lot of the time she was reduced to having to sit there and just give him a look that indicated that she knew he was lying.
Which I think she rightly, not let him do, because I think that she was very strong with him, but in certain instances, and it's probably because she's a woman who's been dealing with this her entire life. I think that she knew the times when he was basically just hanging himself.
Yeah,
I think that she could. I think that she was reading those moments well. I didn't watch the whole thing. I only watched probably about the first 20 minutes and then realized that I didn't care. And so I just didn't watch the rest of it. But there were a few moments where I was sort of like, oh, she gets, because initially I was like, oh, she needs to start cutting him off. But then I was like, oh no, I think that she knows that he's coming off gross right now. Yeah,
she was pretty good at reading those moments. And also I would say the strongest, listen, she was a woman who had to get on national television and insist in no uncertain terms that they would never, ever ban fracking, a position that is wildly unpopular in her party. So she was a person who every time she opened her mouth said something that turned off voters. So because of that, I think she knew that she needed the memorable moments to be her silences.
Yeah.
And so she did some of the best silent looking of any candidate that has raced the debate stage so far. Yeah. And that was, I think, she's been left in a kind of, as the whole Biden campaign has been by themselves, but left in a kind of uncomfortable position where here's the thing. Pence tried to flip everything the GOP has done onto the Democrats. So he kept talking about how the Democrats need to believe scientists, which was hilarious. And then he kept trying to go on about how Trump had solved coronavirus and what were the Democrats doing. And then he kept going on about how systemic racism doesn't exist, which I'm sure is true in his experience because no one has ever looked more sheet-like on television than Mike Pence. So how would he know racism exists? His experience is that of a literal ghost. But they also spent a lot of time insisting that their opponents were socialists. And this is something that the Democrats have not been smart about because we knew that this was going to be one of their main talking points. And the Democrats keep saying, no, we beat the socialists. Of course we're not. We've never disgusting socialists. Ew, gross. When fully 40% of their party identifies as socialists. And they fall for it every time because the Republicans are only saying that so that they will disavow their own voters. That is why you use that talking point.
Right. Well, and Trump gave that game away in the first debate because he was like, oh, you just lost the left, which is exactly. All right, settle down.
Literally told us that was why they were saying that. Right. Trump always tells us what his strategy is, as I've said many times. And that was one of the ones that he revealed in lucid terms
Right.
Almost.
I just wish that either of them were capable, and I think that actually Kamala Harris is capable of answering
Well,
this question,
I feel like she's the one who could
has
be.
probably been told to just not. But like
Yeah.
the response to that is, you know, if I want to give more people healthcare, then sure, maybe I'm a socialist. If I'm a person who wants to have a job program to make sure we end climate change, then sure, I'm a socialist. If I,
Because
you know,
I feel
that,
what you do is you say things like, well, I don't know, if being a socialist means you want better gun control, then 90% of the country is socialist. If being a socialist means that you want to expand healthcare access, then 85% of the country is socialist. If like
that's what you do.
Come prepared to diffuse the argument by not taking the bait, and they take the bait literally every single time. It's so infuriating.
Right. And I'm not, oh, sorry, go ahead.
But they should have, because the person who never did take the bait on that was Bernie.
Yeah.
Because that's what he would always say those things.
Yeah,
that's the answer.
And that's the answer. Right.
Yeah. But also it's kind of for someone of my age who grew up through the whole Red Scare thing and all of that. It's really ironic to hear these people who are in bed with Putin, you know, adore, you know, Kim Jong-un, have this flirty relationship with China. And then they blame the Democrats of being socialist. Yeah. So we want to be like Sweden or Norway. I mean, you know, it's just it's so ludicrous.
Yeah. And I want to briefly touch on, because we just talked about the fracking issue, and I want to talk about that really quickly, because that annoys me for two reasons. One, because as AOC tweeted after that debate, actually fracking is bad.
Right.
So I'm mad that they can't just say fracking is bad. But B, this is the type of thing that I think is emblematic of what Democrats get wrong a lot of times. Because a Republican, if that was their stance, just would have been like, yeah, we're going to ban fracking, for God's sake. Like, nobody likes fracking. But the Democrats are worried about, like, you know, 100 people who have fracking jobs in Pennsylvania or whatever it is. And they can't just say, we want to ban fracking because it's bad. Also, 90% of the country wants to ban fracking. Also, 100% of Gen Z and millennials want to ban fracking. And they are the ones who are looking for like any single reason to vote for us right now. It's just stupid politically to not just say, yeah, we're going to ban fracking. Nobody likes fracking.
Well, and it's also like for every one loudmouth idiot in your neighborhood who has has fracking going on their former farm that stopped making money 10 years ago and they needed something, like they have like 10 neighbors who have like flammable water who do want you to ban fracking.
Right.
Like the fracking areas are not uniform on this issue. I mean, as we learned when there was the fracking discussion in upstate New York, there were people who were wildly pro fracking because, you know, they have a bunch of land and no way to make money on it. But the community of people, there was a much larger, but early on silent community of people who were like, no, thanks. I would prefer that my neighbors not make my water flammable and I won't be fracking on my land. So like, it's like for every 10 farmers, there's 2,000 villagers who don't want flammable water. So like, it's not a winning, it's like their strategy of reaching out to the right and saying, no, socialists are icky and we hate them.
Yeah, it's the same principle.
It's the same principle.
But another part of it is that the economics of it have changed dramatically, and natural gas is no longer a moneymaker.
Yeah.
And so fracking, I mean, there's no reason to even talk about it because, you know, I live in fracking land. We don't frack in New York State, but it's always a question here. And they, with all the different crises that are going on right now, it's just gone out the window because there's no way to make it pay. So it's kind of a really stupid argument to.
I think it is too.
Right, like the wave of the future does not want fracking, so just like don't worry about it.
Right.
Let's
That's
before we move on.
That's not going to lose the election.
No. Before we move on, we have one final important point to point out about the VP race, which is that a lot of speculation started because Mike Pence, who had a largely vampiric look to him for much of the race, I don't know if because of lighting or some other quality, also appeared to have pink eye, which people immediately and frantically looked up to see if that's a symptom of coronavirus. It is.
It is.
And then also he made a last minute change to his travel schedule to cancel some travel. So everyone's been wildly speculating.
He was supposed to go vote in Indiana. That's what he canceled.
He canceled a trip to go vote in Indiana. So everyone's speculating about whether he has coronavirus. And
maybe he canceled it because he hasn't decided who he's voting for yet.
I know. I also feel like there was some other speculation that maybe they canceled it because Donald Trump is about to croak and they don't know what to do.
He just needed to get back to Washington.
He just needed to get back to Washington. Yeah. But for all intents and purposes, also Deadline accidentally published an article saying they had pre-written an article just in case he got coronavirus, as you would in this situation, and they accidentally published it. So there was briefly some confusion because there was a tweet from Deadline or Variety. It was like some entertainment paper, I think it was Deadline, that said, "Do not post. Mike Pence has coronavirus."
Right.
So that started some speculation for a while.
Yeah.
So Mike Pence may or may not have pink eye or coronavirus or be a vampire. We don't know which it is. And we will keep you updated as we learn more. One person who definitely still has coronavirus and yet is hitting the trail again is one Donald Trump. He decided to throw a super spreader event yesterday, Saturday, at the White House. It was a little embarrassing because they invited thousands of people and only like 400 came because I guess people are less excited to get coronavirus than you might think. And so it was sort of a crowd size inauguration conversation size situation where they wanted to pretend like it was the most popular event that's ever been thrown by a human being. And instead it was like 0 people. But what was weird is that at the event, he made an appearance, took his mask off to speak, obviously, so that he could spread coronavirus to his adoring fans. He had Band-Aids on his hands from IVs, which
IVs.
Means that he had been on IVs as recently as the last couple of days because those IV things, they don't take that long to heal.
No, you don't need to. It's a tiny, obviously a needle-sized prick. You don't need to wear Band-Aids for weeks after you get an IV. So he only spoke for 18 minutes. He seemed fine, but people were commenting his voice was raspy. He also broke a lot of laws because he gave a campaign speech at a White House event. Well, and he had his convention there. So, and we've obviously stopped caring about that.
That law's out there. I'm just going to mention it every time he does it, but just FYI, it was an illegal event, but sure, whatever. He mentioned at the event that the virus is disappearing, which is so hilarious because the one place that it continues to appear regularly is the White House, the place he was giving that speech. And also, numerically speaking, it's not disappearing, it's staying. It's the same.
Yeah, we actually had our first day of over 50,000 cases as a nation since early August this last week. So it's actually, you're seeing spikes in a lot of places. Again, which is not great, especially considering we're, actually entering the fall here. People are getting their flu shots already. So not great numbers, as you said. Yes, doing the exact opposite of what Trump claims.
But Donald Trump is determined to super spread to as many places as possible. So he is starting his rally schedule up again on Monday in Florida, where I'm sure they could use more coronavirus. And he will be hitting the campaign trail, super spreading around America. Yep. So if you're looking for coronavirus, you might be able to find it at a Trump rally coming to you soon.
Yeah.
His doctor says he's no longer in danger of transmitting the virus, but nobody will confirm he's ever tested negative for it or anything about his testing at all. And also, most doctors, listen, if you've had coronavirus for 10 days and it was a mild case, you might not be contagious anymore. But most doctors say that this early in a severe case of coronavirus, they would not be so sure he's not contagious. Yeah. So, because it's only been 10 days.
Right. The mayor of Miami who had it said that he tested positive until the 17th day.
Yeah.
Wow.
And he's a much younger man and much better shape. Yeah.
So yeah, and Chris Christie got released from the hospital too.
Oh, he did. Yeah. Rudy Giuliani was on Fox News the other day and looked like the undead. I mean,
Rudy Giuliani looks like he is currently suffering from the phase post-coronavirus where you are a dead person. I mean, he looks bad.
Yeah, he looked bad.
Meanwhile, we also had an exciting break in our usual schedule this week because they arrested 13 people in a plot to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer. Remember when Donald Trump tweeted "Liberate Michigan"? And some people took that very seriously.
Sure.
Hatched a plan to kidnap the governor and then got charged on Thursday in that plot. 2 of the men were former Marines. There were 6 people charged with conspiracy to kidnap. 7 other people associated with a local militia were charged by the state. The guy who organized it all, by the way, based on their mugshots, you already know what these guys look like. It's like
Yeah.
a bunch of like middle-aged white guys.
Well, and I also think that like, thankfully, the type of people who would think that this is a good idea are also the type of people who it under no circumstances would be able to pull it off.
That's so true. But they got closer than you would hope.
I know.
The plan was elaborate. And it's
The plan
funny
was
because
elaborate.
It was not getting reported as a terrorist plot, but I can't think of anything that fits the criteria of terrorist plot more than this.
Yeah,
This is
of
literally
course.
what terrorism is,
Yeah,
you
it's
guys.
domestic
It's like,
terrorism, for
yeah,
sure.
it's like Muslim people like try to vote and they get accused of being terrorists. And like these
Right.
people were like trying to kidnap the governor of Michigan and I believe try her for treason, if I recall the plot correctly. And yet somehow that's
Sorry,
just,
I'm laughing. It's
that's
not
every
funny.
day in America.
It's horrifying. I know.
The press
I'm
conference was
excited.
actually borderline hilarious because it was so over the top and ridiculous.
Oh, I am so excited for the like HBO adaptation of this.
I know.
Because it's gonna be delightful.
Yeah, the guy who initially thought of it was named Adam Fox, and he reached out to a Michigan group that was probably the Wolverine Watchmen, a militia in Michigan. Got introduced to the leader and said he needed 200 men to storm the Capitol in Lansing and take Gretchen Whitmer hostage, and then they were going to try her for treason before the election. So they needed to get this done quick.
Yep.
They got as far as planning some, they were going to plan diversions by setting off Molotov cocktails elsewhere to destroy police vehicles, so it looked like an attack on the police.
Mm-hmm.
They had plans, and they had met, they were caught at a meeting where they were going to pool the money to actually get the stuff they needed to, I don't know, throw Molotov cocktails at the police and kidnap the governor. They were, a lot of them connected to the Boogaloo movement, which is a confusing movement of idiot white men who stand for everything and nothing, but are kind of anarchists, but also kind of white supremacists and kind of, who knows what they're up to. But in any case, this plot was real fucking elaborate. And I mean, it sounds like it doesn't need a movie adaptation because it was already a movie. Like watching CNN that morning was like watching a movie as they described the plot. I watched every moment of that press conference because I was too excited by just every detail was insane.
Yeah.
And then you would text people and be like, this Michigan thing, and they would be like, what? And it was so exciting to get to be the person to deliver the news that someone had been plotting to kidnap the governor of Michigan, that I did that all day to people that I thought might not be reading the news. Kind of fun. And then in South Carolina's final news, we have some follow-ups on the Senate, on some specifics of the Senate race there.
Yeah.
Lindsey Graham, as we noted earlier, is refusing to get a COVID test because he wants to, A, be a super spreader in the Senate, and B, he wants to be available for the Amy Coney Barrett hearings.
That's what I was going to say. If he gets a positive, those are starting tomorrow, by the way, against all odds.
And reason.
And reason, right? Yeah, exactly. But yeah, he doesn't want to.
He doesn't want to miss those.
He doesn't want to miss those. So if he gets a positive test, then he can't go. But also, if he doesn't know whether he's negative or positive, then he's just going to give it to everybody who's there.
Right, because he's been exposed multiple times in the last couple of weeks. He's been meeting with every coronavirus super spreader in the White House and Senate.
Yeah.
In any case, he refused to get a test before a debate with Jamie Harrison. So Jamie Harrison was like, no, sir, I will not debate you then. And so instead, they did this like TV special where they did back-to-back interviews.
Yeah.
And by the way, Lindsey Graham's reason for not getting the test, that the stated reason, the insane reason that he tried, because there's no reason, was that he claimed he wasn't going to do it because I'm not going to live my life differently than you have to live yours, referencing that average Americans are working with colleagues who haven't been tested. But the thing is, we have gone through great pains to ensure that people have access to testing so that we don't have to live like he's choosing to live right now.
Right. If I had been to a known super spreader event, then I would just go get a COVID test.
Right. As a regular American, that would be a responsibility I would feel fell on me.
Yeah.
But he said, for those of you who work for a living, you can't do what Mr. Harrison has demanded tonight. The thing is that you can, and most people are.
And you're supposed to.
And you're supposed to, right, exactly.
So this is, and if you can't, it's literally because his party is making it sound like there is not known science about this. So like, enough with you, Lindsey Graham.
Yeah.
But also, it meant that he had half an hour to speak unfettered on television and said, in the process, some troubling things. He was asked, much like Mike Pence, about racism in America. Do I think that there's racism in South Carolina?
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, Lindsey Graham is a man who doesn't think that there's racism in South Carolina, a place famous for its known racism. So he was kind of waxing poetic about that, if you will, and said to young people of color, to young immigrants, this is a great state. I'm asking every African American out there, look at my record. He said, trying to vaguely reference that he's supported HBCUs, I guess, but like,
Yeah.
it was a very oblique reference. I care about everybody. If you are young African American and immigrant, you can go anywhere in this state. You just need to be conservative, not liberal. Now, he failed to offer any advice about how to ensure that you are understood to be conservative and not liberal, because I would contend that one of the things that makes people presume that you are not conservative and are liberal is having black skin.
Being
or
black. Right.
Yeah, it's being black. And if you are being brown, being
Or
an
brown.
immigrant,
Yes.
being black or
Right.
brown in South Carolina is often taken as an indication to uninformed observers that you are not conservative. So what I think we would like to hear from Lindsey Graham is what people in this position can do to project the air of conservatism that keeps them safe in South Carolina,
Right.
so that they too can feel that they are safe there.
Yeah.
And that wasn't a statement that he offered
It wasn't.
in the course of this conversation. And that's Brain Trust Live is calling on Lindsey Graham to clarify how to project an air of conservatism to keep yourself safe in South
I
Carolina.
think everyone is calling on Lindsey Graham to clarify that statement.
In any case, that's the news this week.
Oh man.
Thank you, Mom, for coming on and giving us a Senate
Thank you
rundown,
so much.
Yeah, that was fun.
doing all that research.
I think that was super informative to
yes.
everyone.
And we will be back next week, hopefully with some prop special news.
Yeah, we're gonna do some
and
prop stuff.
We're gonna do some prop stuff, and then also like the news, as you might expect to hear it. So we'll talk to you next week. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.